Lift Trap or Love Trap. A story brought to you by Drama Spark, created by Pearl. If someone had told me that the love of my life lived just one floor above me, I would have laughed. Not because it sounded impossible. Because for 2 whole years, we managed to turn a simple elevator ride into an Olympic sport of avoiding conversation. My name is Clara, and this is the story of how 45 unexpected minutes changed my entire life. It all started after I moved into Ashwood Heights, a quiet apartment building tucked away on a peaceful street. I had just turned 29 and accepted a new position as a graphic designer. It was one of those fresh starts people always talk about after a difficult chapter. I wasn't running away from anything. At least that's what I kept telling myself. The truth was that my previous relationship had ended in the most ordinary way possible. No dramatic arguments. No betrayal. We had simply grown into strangers who happened to know each other's coffee orders. After that, I promised myself I would focus on work. No dating apps. No blind dates. No searching. Life would happen when it was ready. Little did I know, life was already waiting on the 7th floor. The first time I saw Kurt was during my 2nd week in the building. I remember because I was carrying far too many grocery bags. One of them ripped open right in front of the elevator. Oranges rolled across the lobby like tiny escape artists. Before I could panic, someone knelt beside me. "Looks like they're making a run for it," he said with a smile. His voice was calm, warm, and surprisingly reassuring. Together we chased every orange before they disappeared under the mailboxes. When he handed me the last one, our fingers brushed for just a second. "Thanks," I said. "No problem." The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside first and held the door. I joined him. 7 floors. Just the 2 of us. Neither of us spoke another word. When the elevator reached my floor, I smiled politely. "Have a good evening." "You too." That was it. Or so I thought. The next morning, I saw him again. Same elevator. Same polite smile. Same silence. It slowly became a routine. Every weekday around 8:15 in the morning, we'd somehow leave our apartments at almost exactly the same time. I lived on the 7th floor. He lived on the 8th. Our timing became so consistent that I started wondering if one of us was secretly adjusting our schedule. Not that I'd ever admit I occasionally waited an extra 30 seconds before locking my apartment door. Pure coincidence. Obviously. He was always dressed neatly. Sometimes in a navy jacket. Sometimes wearing a gray sweater that somehow made his blue eyes stand out even more. His hair was usually slightly messy, like he'd run his hand through it moments before leaving. He carried the same black messenger bag every day. I invented 100 stories about him. Maybe he was an architect. Or an engineer. Maybe he was a teacher. One morning he carried a bouquet of flowers. I spent the entire day convincing myself they were for his girlfriend. That evening I saw him placing the flowers beside an elderly woman's apartment door. His grandmother, perhaps. Or maybe a neighbor. I realized I'd smiled for the rest of the evening. It was ridiculous. I barely knew his name. Actually, I didn't know his name at all. Until 3 months later. One Saturday afternoon, I was collecting a package from the front desk when the building manager looked up. "Oh, Clara. Could you hand this envelope to Kurt if you see him? He lives upstairs." Kurt. Such a simple name, but somehow it suited him perfectly. That evening, I whispered it to myself while making dinner. "Kurt." Then I immediately laughed. What was I doing? I sounded like a teenager with her first crush. Over the months, our silent friendship became strangely comfortable. We developed our own language. A nod meant good morning. A smile meant have a nice day. Holding the elevator door meant, "I saw you running." If one of us looked exhausted, the other would give a sympathetic smile that somehow said, "Long day." No words. Yet somehow. Communication. There were moments when I almost spoke. Once I noticed he was reading my favorite novel. I opened my mouth. Then the elevator reached the lobby. Opportunity gone. Another time he sneezed. I wanted to say, "Bless you." Instead, I smiled awkwardly while staring at the floor numbers. Brilliant, Clara. Absolutely brilliant. The seasons changed. Summer became autumn. Autumn became winter. Christmas lights decorated the lobby. Then spring arrived again. Our lives continued in parallel. Close enough to notice each other. Too distant to become part of each other's world. Sometimes I'd wonder if he ever thought about me after stepping out of the elevator. I certainly thought about him. More often than I should have. One rainy Tuesday morning, the power flickered while we were descending. The lights blinked once. The elevator gave a tiny shake. For half a second, we looked at each other. He smiled nervously. I hate when that happens. Those were the first words he'd spoken to me in nearly a year. I laughed. Me too. Then the power stabilized. The elevator continued moving. And somehow, neither of us said another word. I replayed those 6 words in my head for an embarrassingly long time. I hate when that happens. Not exactly poetry. Yet hearing his voice again felt strangely comforting. A few weeks later, I bumped into one of my friends after work. She noticed me smiling while checking my mailbox. What are you smiling about? Nothing. You met someone. I haven't. She crossed her arms. Then why are you smiling like that? I sighed. There's this guy. Oh? We've never actually had a conversation. She blinked. How long have you known him? Almost 2 years. She nearly dropped her coffee. Clara, what? We ride the elevator together. That's it. We smile. She stared at me for several seconds. You've had a crush on a man you've barely spoken to for almost 2 years. When you say it like that, it sounds completely insane. It does. So why don't you ask him for coffee? I looked down. What if he says no? What if he says yes? That question followed me home. What if he said yes? The thought was exciting. Terrifying. Impossible. The next morning, I decided today's the day. If I saw Kurt, I'd introduce myself properly. I'd ask what he did for work. Maybe mention the weather. Anything. Simple. Normal. Adult. The elevator doors opened. He was already inside. He smiled. Morning. My heart raced. This was it. Say something. Anything. Instead, I smiled back. Morning. The doors opened at the lobby. He walked out. So did I. And just like that, another opportunity disappeared. Looking back now, it's almost funny. 2 adults. Perfectly capable of holding conversations with complete strangers every single day. Yet somehow incapable of speaking to each other. Neither of us knew it then. But fate had grown tired of waiting for us. And before the week was over, an ordinary elevator ride would become the most unforgettable 45 minutes of our lives. Sometimes life waits patiently for you. And sometimes, it traps you inside an elevator until you finally have the conversation you've been avoiding for 2 years. The morning started like every other Thursday. I left my apartment a few minutes after 8. Laptop bag over one shoulder. Travel mug in one hand. Trying to convince myself that today would be different. If Kurt was there, I'd actually talk to him. No excuses. No awkward smiles. No letting another opportunity disappear. When the elevator doors opened on the 7th floor, he was already inside. Just like always, he looked up and smiled. Morning. Morning. There it was again. One word. One tiny opening. My heart was already rehearsing 100 different conversation starters. How's your week going? Busy day? I like your jacket. Anything. Before I could choose one, the doors closed. The elevator began its familiar descent. 8. 7. 6. The quiet hum of the motor filled the silence. 5. 4. Then everything stopped. The lights blinked once. Twice. The elevator jerked so suddenly that I lost my balance. Before I could fall, a steady hand caught my arm. "You okay?" I looked up. Kurt hadn't let go yet. His expression wasn't panicked. Just concerned. I think so. Only then did he slowly release my arm. Another flicker. The main lights went out, replaced by dim emergency lighting that painted the small elevator in a soft amber glow. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then we both laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because sometimes laughter is easier than admitting you're nervous. "I guess you were right," I said. He tilted his head. "About what?" "You said you hated it when the elevator did this." Recognition spread across his face. "I can't believe you remembered that." I smiled. "I remember more than you probably realize." The words escaped before I had time to stop them. My cheeks warmed immediately. "Great job, Clara. 5 seconds into a real conversation, and you're already embarrassing yourself." But instead of looking uncomfortable, Kurt smiled. "So do I." The words were quiet. Almost shy. Somewhere above us, a faint mechanical click echoed through the shaft. Then silence returned. Kurt pressed the emergency button. A crackling voice answered almost immediately. "This is building security. We've had a neighborhood power outage. Emergency generators are running, but we're checking each elevator manually." "Are both of you okay?" "We're fine," Kurt replied. "Good. Please stay calm. Engineering is on the way. It may take around 45 minutes. 45 minutes. I looked at Kurt. He looked back at me. Neither of us could hide the same thought. After nearly 2 years of exchanging smiles, we suddenly had 45 uninterrupted minutes together. "No escaping now," he joked. I laughed. "I guess not." For another few seconds, silence settled between us. It wasn't uncomfortable. Just unfamiliar. "So," he finally said, "I've been trying to figure out your name for months." I blinked. "You didn't know?" He shook his head. "I almost asked the building manager once." I couldn't help laughing. "My name's Clara." He held out his hand as though we were meeting for the first time. "I'm Kurt." His handshake was warm. Confident. Completely ordinary. Yet somehow it felt strangely significant. "It's nice to finally meet you," he said. Finally. That single word made me smile. It only took us 2 years. "I know." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I've been wondering how we managed that." "You tell me." I kept waiting for the right moment. I laughed. "So did I." He stared at me for a second. "Seriously?" I nodded. "Seriously." For the first time, we both realized something incredible. Neither of us had been avoiding the other. We'd both been afraid. Afraid of saying the wrong thing. Afraid of making future elevator rides awkward. Afraid of discovering the smile wasn't meant for us after all. "I have to admit something," Kurt said. "What?" "I know exactly when you leave for work." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds slightly creepy." "I know." He laughed. "But hear me out. I'm listening. I started leaving 5 minutes earlier because I noticed you usually came out around 8:15. I couldn't stop smiling. "I noticed." "You did?" "I may have occasionally waited 30 seconds before locking my apartment." He burst into laughter. "No way." "I'm afraid so. So we've both been adjusting our schedules. Just to ride the elevator together." We looked at each other. Then laughed even harder. 2 years. Hundreds of shared rides. Neither of us realizing we'd been doing exactly the same thing. "That's unbelievable," he said. "It's also incredibly embarrassing." "A little." He smiled. "But kind of sweet." I looked down at my coffee cup. "It is." The emergency lights buzzed softly above us. Outside, rain tapped gently against the building somewhere beyond the concrete walls. Inside the elevator, the world suddenly felt very small. In the nicest possible way. So I asked, "What do you actually do?" He smiled. "I'm a structural engineer." I pointed at him triumphantly. I knew it. "You did?" "Well, actually, I guessed architect. Then teacher. Then engineer." He laughed. "I like that teacher made the list. What about me?" "Oh, I had theories. I'm almost afraid to ask." "Veterinarian." I blinked. "What?" "You always smiled at every dog that came into the lobby." "I do love dogs." Then I decided maybe you were a photographer. "Not even close." "And eventually." "What?" "I noticed the sketchbook sticking out of your bag." I smiled. "I'm a graphic designer." I knew it. "You absolutely did not." I absolutely did. We both laughed again. The conversation flowed so naturally that I almost forgot we were trapped. We talked about favorite cafes, weekend routines, books we'd read, movies we'd watched 3 times, the tiny bakery around the corner where the cinnamon rolls always sold out before noon. Every answer somehow led to another question. Every question revealed another surprising similarity. At one point we discovered we'd both spent an entire Saturday volunteering at the same neighborhood charity event last year. Different shifts. Just missing each other by less than an hour. "So we've almost met properly more than once," I said. "Apparently fate enjoys terrible timing." "Or excellent timing." He tilted his head. "What makes you say that?" I thought about it. If we'd talked 2 years ago, maybe we wouldn't have appreciated this conversation. He smiled thoughtfully. "Maybe." A comfortable silence settled between us. Not the old silence. This one felt full. Like there was no pressure to fill every second. I glanced at him. He was already looking at me. "You know something?" he asked. "What?" "I used to think you were out of my league." I stared at him. "You cannot be serious." "I am." "Kurt." I figured someone as friendly and confident as you probably had a boyfriend. I laughed so suddenly that coffee nearly came out of my nose. "Confident? You seem confident." "I've spent 2 years trying to say hello." He grinned. "Fair point." I shook my head. "I thought you were the confident one." "Absolutely not. You always looked so calm." I was rehearsing conversations in my head. "You were." Every elevator ride. I covered my face with both hands. "Oh no." "What?" I was doing exactly the same thing. We looked at each other. Then, without either of us planning it, we simply smiled. Not the polite smiles we'd shared for 2 years. Not the careful smiles of strangers. This one felt different. Warmer. Honest. As though we were finally seeing each other instead of simply standing beside each other. A loud metallic sound echoed above us. The elevator shifted gently. Then another voice came through the speaker. "Good news. We've restored power. We'll have you moving again in just a moment." I should have been relieved. Instead, a tiny part of me wished those 45 minutes could last just a little longer. Because somewhere between the awkward introductions, shared laughter, and unexpected confessions, the stranger from the 8th floor had quietly become someone I never wanted to stop talking to. The elevator hummed back to life. Neither of us spoke. Not because we had nothing left to say, but because we both knew that what happened after those doors opened might matter even more than everything we'd shared while they stayed closed. Chapter 3 Trapped. People always talk about life-changing moments, as if they arrive with dramatic music. A grand confession. A kiss in the rain. A perfectly timed miracle. But sometimes, life changes with the quiet sound of elevator doors sliding open. The familiar chime echoed softly. The doors parted. The bright lobby light spilled inside, almost making me squint after 45 minutes beneath the gentle glow of the emergency lamps. Neither of us moved. For one strange second, we simply stood there. The world outside had started again. But inside that elevator, time had seemed to pause. Finally, Kurt smiled. I guess this is our stop. I laughed. It only took us 2 years to get here. And 45 minutes. We stepped into the lobby together. The building manager hurried toward us. I'm so sorry about that. Are you both all right? We're fine, Kurt answered. It turned out better than expected, I added with a smile. The manager looked pleasantly confused. Well, that's good to hear. As he walked away, Kurt glanced at the large clock behind the reception desk. We're both very late. I think my office has figured that out. He hesitated. I could almost see him debating something in his mind. Then he took a quiet breath. Clara? Yes? Can I ask you something? My heart immediately forgot how to beat properly. Of course. Would you, maybe? He laughed nervously. I had a better version of this planned. I believe you. Would you like to get coffee before we go to work? I smiled before he had even finished asking. I'd love to. The relief on his face made me laugh. You were worried I'd say no. I've been worried for about 2 years. So have I. We walked across the street to a small cafe neither of us had ever visited, despite passing it almost every morning. The place smelled of fresh coffee, butter, and warm cinnamon. Rain still tapped gently against the windows. It felt as though the whole city had slowed down with us. We found a table by the glass. For a moment, we simply looked at each other and laughed. What? I asked. This is weird. The good kind. The very good kind. I nodded. It really is. The waitress arrived. I'll have a cappuccino, I said. The same for me, Kurt replied. And 2 cinnamon rolls. He looked at me. You like cinnamon rolls too? They're my weakness. He grinned. I was literally about to order one. The waitress smiled. I'll bring 2. As soon as she left, I shook my head. This is getting ridiculous. I know. We've lived in the same building for 2 years. Apparently we also have the same breakfast. I'm starting to think someone's been copying my life. He pointed toward me. I was about to accuse you of exactly the same thing. The coffee arrived. Steam curled gently into the air between us. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about work. Or deadlines. Or emails waiting in my inbox. I was simply enjoying being exactly where I was. So Kurt asked, wrapping his hands around the warm cup, why graphic design? I smiled. I've always loved taking ideas that only exist in someone's imagination and turning them into something people can actually see. That suits you. How? You notice details. I do? You remembered something I said almost a year ago. I laughed. I suppose I did. He smiled. I noticed too. What did you notice? He thought for a moment. You always help people. I blinked. I don't think I do. You do. When? The elderly gentleman who drops his newspapers every Tuesday. I frowned. You saw that? Every week. What else? He smiled softly. You always hold the lobby door open if someone is carrying groceries. I looked down into my coffee. I never realized anyone noticed. I did. His answer came so quietly that it almost disappeared beneath the sound of the rain. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Not because it was awkward. Because some words deserve a little silence afterward. Finally, I smiled. You notice a lot. I've had 2 years. I looked out the cafe window. Cars passed through the wet streets. People hurried beneath umbrellas. Everyone seemed to have somewhere important to be. Yet somehow, I couldn't imagine anywhere more important than this table. I have a confession, I said. He raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. I know your schedule. He laughed immediately. I suspected as much. No. I mean I really know your schedule. Oh? Monday mornings you always carry a travel mug. True. Wednesdays you stop at the bakery downstairs. I do. Fridays you wear sneakers instead of dress shoes. He stared at me. Okay, now I'm slightly impressed. I also know you call your mother every Sunday evening. His eyes widened. How did you know that? I heard you once in the lobby. He smiled. I do. My turn, he said. Oh no. You sing. I froze. What? In the elevator. I absolutely do not. You hum. When you think you're alone. Heat rushed to my cheeks. You've heard that. More than once. I should probably apologize. Don't. He smiled warmly. It always made Monday mornings feel a little happier. I laughed into my coffee cup. I can't believe this. I can. What do you mean? I think we've been part of each other's lives for much longer than we realized. His words settled gently between us. He was right. We hadn't been strangers. Not really. We'd been quiet witnesses to each other's ordinary days. Watching. Smiling. Wondering. Without ever saying the things that mattered. Our phones buzzed almost at the same time. Work. Reality reminding us it still existed. I suppose we should go, I said. I suppose. Neither of us sounded particularly enthusiastic. We stood. Walked back toward the building. Then toward the subway station. The morning rush surrounded us, but it no longer felt lonely. At the station entrance, our paths separated. He worked across the river. I worked downtown. For the first time in 2 years, saying goodbye suddenly felt difficult. So. He rubbed the back of his neck. This might sound incredibly optimistic. I like optimistic. Would you maybe? He smiled nervously. Have dinner with me tonight? I didn't answer immediately. Not because I wasn't sure. Because I wanted to enjoy the moment for just one heartbeat longer. The moment when 2 years of wondering finally became certainty. I'd love to. The smile that spread across his face was brighter than the morning sun breaking through the clouds. 7. I'll meet you in the lobby. No elevator this time. He laughed. Actually. He looked toward the apartment building behind us. Maybe the elevator deserves some credit. I smiled. I think it does. As we headed toward different train platforms, I caught myself smiling so much that complete strangers smiled back at me. For the first time in years, my heart felt wonderfully light. But as I reached my office and stepped out onto the bustling street, I couldn't shake one thought. If 45 unexpected minutes could change everything, what might happen over dinner? Chapter 4: First Official Date. There are first dates you spend weeks planning. Then there are first dates that begin because an elevator stopped working. Ours somehow felt like both. By the time I finished work, I had checked the clock so many times that my manager finally laughed. Big plans tonight, Clara. I tried to sound casual. Just dinner. She smiled knowingly. Well, whoever it is, don't keep them waiting. If only she knew. 2 years of silence. 45 minutes trapped together. 1 coffee. And now. Dinner. I arrived home just after 6. For the first time in months, I stood in front of my wardrobe with absolutely no idea what to wear. Too formal. He'll think I'm trying too hard. Too casual. He'll think I didn't make an effort. I must have changed outfits 4 times before finally choosing a simple emerald green dress with a light cardigan. Comfortable. Elegant. Still me. At exactly 6:58, I stepped into the hallway. The elevator doors opened. Empty. I smiled to myself. Somehow, it felt wrong to ride down without him. When I reached the lobby, Kurt was already there. He looked up from his phone, and the moment our eyes met, his face lit up. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he said softly, "You look beautiful." The compliment was so genuine that I forgot every thank you I'd ever learned. Instead, I smiled. "So do you." He looked down at his navy blazer and laughed. "I don't think anyone has ever called me beautiful. There's a first time for everything." He grinned. "I'll happily accept it." We walked out into the cool evening air together. The rain had washed the city clean. The sidewalks reflected the warm glow of streetlights, and the air carried the comforting scent of damp trees and freshly baked bread from the bakery around the corner. "So," I asked, "where are we going?" "It's a surprise. I don't know if I like surprises." "You trusted me in a broken elevator." "That's because I didn't have much choice." He laughed. "Fair point." After a 10-minute walk, we arrived at a small Italian restaurant tucked away on a quiet side street. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't trendy. It felt welcoming. "I've walked past this place dozens of times," I said. "So have I." "You've never been?" "No." "Why tonight?" He smiled. I wanted our first date to be somewhere new for both of us. Something about that answer warmed my heart. Neither of us was trying to recreate an old memory. We were creating our first one. Inside, the restaurant glowed with soft amber lights. A violin melody drifted quietly through hidden speakers. Couples chatted over candlelight. Fresh pasta and garlic filled the air. Our table sat beside a window overlooking the peaceful street. After we ordered, conversation flowed as naturally as it had that morning. Only now. There was no ticking clock. No office waiting. No elevator doors ready to interrupt us. "So," Kurt asked, "tell me something no one would guess about you." I thought for a moment. "I'm terrified of public speaking." His eyebrows lifted. "Really?" "I can present ideas to clients one-on-one all day. But put me in front of 50 people, and my brain forgets my own name." He smiled. "I never would have guessed. What about you?" He looked almost embarrassed. "I play the piano." I blinked. "You do?" "Only when nobody's listening." "You've hidden that for 2 years." "I've hidden a lot for 2 years." There was something quietly vulnerable in the way he said it. "What made you start?" "My grandmother." His smile softened. "She taught me when I was 6. The flowers." He looked surprised. "The flowers you left outside the elderly woman's apartment." He nodded. "Mrs. Lawson. She isn't your grandmother?" "No." He smiled fondly. "She was my piano teacher for almost 15 years. My heart melted a little. She still lives upstairs. 8th floor, opposite my apartment. So you still bring her flowers?" "Every Thursday." I couldn't stop smiling. I remember wondering who they were for. "And I wondered why you always smiled when you saw them." Our meals arrived. Fresh pasta. Warm bread. Simple food that somehow tasted extraordinary. Maybe because I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed this much. Halfway through dinner, Kurt leaned back slightly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why didn't you ever talk to me?" I laughed. "I was hoping you'd never ask." "I'm asking." I sighed dramatically. "Fine. I thought you had a girlfriend." He nearly choked on his water. "What?" "The flowers." He burst into laughter. "You thought they were for a girlfriend?" "For almost an entire day." "What changed?" "I saw you leave them outside Mrs. Lawson's apartment." He smiled. "So what stopped you after that?" "I convinced myself you probably weren't interested." He looked genuinely confused. "Clara. I know. I spent 2 years trying to convince myself you weren't interested in me." We stared at each other for a second. Then we both laughed so hard that nearby diners glanced over before smiling themselves. It felt impossible. 2 intelligent adults. Both completely wrong. For 2 years. When the laughter settled, Kurt became unusually quiet. I almost moved. I looked up. What? Last autumn. You did? I found an apartment closer to work. What happened? He smiled sheepishly. I couldn't bring myself to leave. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Why? He held my gaze. Because I'd have missed seeing you every morning. The restaurant seemed to disappear. The conversations around us faded into the background. All I could hear was my own heartbeat. I know that probably sounds ridiculous. It doesn't. I told myself I was being foolish. You weren't. I kept thinking. He hesitated. Maybe one day we'd finally talk. I reached across the table before I had time to second-guess myself. My fingers rested lightly over his hand. I'm glad we did. His thumb gently brushed against mine. So am I. Neither of us moved. Neither of us wanted to. The waiter quietly placed dessert menus on the table before noticing our hands. With a knowing smile, he whispered, "I'll give you a few more minutes." As he walked away, we both laughed softly. I think he knows, Kurt said. I think everyone knows. The dessert menu remained unopened. We were far too busy talking. About childhood dreams. About our families. About places we wanted to visit. About ordinary hopes that somehow felt extraordinary because we were sharing them. Hours slipped by unnoticed. When we finally stepped outside, the streets were calm and almost empty. A gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the night. We walked home without rushing. Without awkward pauses. Without feeling like we needed to impress each other. By the time Ashwood Heights came into view, I realized something that made me smile. For 2 years, I'd wondered who Kurt really was. Tonight, I'd finally met him. And somehow, he was even kinder, funnier, and more genuine than the person I'd imagined. We stopped in front of the building entrance. Neither of us reached for the door. Neither of us seemed ready for the evening to end. Kurt looked at me with the same gentle smile I'd seen hundreds of times in the elevator. Only now, I finally understood what had been behind it all along. Hope. Clara, he said quietly. Yes? I don't want this to be our only date. I smiled. It won't be. His eyes brightened. Really? I nodded. I've waited 2 years for dinner with you. I took one small step closer. I'm not planning to stop at just one. He smiled so warmly that it felt like the entire evening had led to that single moment. Then, almost shyly, he asked, would it be all right if I walked you to your apartment door? I laughed. Kurt. We live in the same building. I know. But somehow, he smiled. It still feels like the right thing to do. Together we stepped into the lobby. The elevator doors slid open. This time, we entered side by side. Not as strangers sharing the same ride, but as two people wondering where the next chapter of their story might lead. As the doors closed behind us, I caught our reflections in the polished metal walls. For the first time in 2 years, neither of us was looking at the floor numbers. We were looking at each other. Chapter 5 Love Trap. People often ask me when I knew I was falling in love with Kurt. Was it during those 45 minutes in the elevator? Our first dinner? The morning coffee that followed a week later? The truth is, love rarely arrives all at once. Sometimes it grows quietly, in the ordinary moments you almost overlook. The weeks after our first date felt wonderfully simple. Every morning, we left our apartments together. No more pretending our timing was a coincidence. No more awkward silence. Instead, we talked. About work. About books. About whatever happened to cross our minds before 8:30 in the morning. Some evenings we'd stop for groceries together. Other nights we'd walk through the neighborhood after dinner, discovering little cafes and bookstores we'd somehow ignored for years. It felt strangely natural, as though we hadn't just started dating, as though we'd been slowly finding our way to each other all along. One Saturday morning, Kurt knocked on my door. When I opened it, he was holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "I have a favor to ask." "That depends." He smiled. "Mrs. Lawson wants to meet you." "The famous piano teacher?" "The very same." "I'd love to." We walked upstairs together. Mrs. Lawson's apartment was warm and filled with music. A grand piano stood beside the window, surrounded by photographs collected over decades. Some showed young musicians. Others showed smiling families. She welcomed us with a smile that instantly reminded me of Kurt. "So," she said, studying us over her glasses, "you're finally here." I blinked. "Finally?" She laughed softly. "I've been waiting for this for nearly 2 years." Kurt looked as surprised as I felt. "You knew?" he asked. "My dear boy," she replied, "everyone in this building knew." I covered my face with my hands. "Oh no." Mrs. Lawson chuckled. "The receptionist knew. The building manager knew. The lady who waters the plants in the lobby knew." She pointed gently toward us. The only 2 people who didn't know were the 2 standing in front of me. Kurt burst into laughter. "I can't believe this." "I can," Mrs. Lawson said kindly. "You were both so careful not to embarrass yourselves that you almost missed each other completely." She looked at me. "You always smiled when Kurt brought me flowers." I nodded. "I thought they were for his girlfriend." Mrs. Lawson laughed so hard she had to wipe away a tear. "Oh, Clara." Then she reached for Kurt's hand. "This young man has never once brought flowers for anyone else." Kurt's ears turned bright red. "I think that's enough, Mrs. Lawson." "Oh, not even close." She smiled mischievously. "Do you know why he always insisted on taking the elevator instead of the stairs?" I looked at Kurt. "You said it was because you were usually carrying your laptop." Mrs. Lawson shook her head. "He told me the elevator gave him 30 extra seconds to see a beautiful woman every morning." "Kurt." He looked at the floor, smiling helplessly. I may have said something like that. I couldn't stop laughing. And here I was, I admitted, waiting outside my apartment for 30 seconds every morning so I'd run into him. Mrs. Lawson clapped her hands together. "I knew it." Kurt looked at me in disbelief. "You really did that? Every weekday? For 2 years? Don't judge me." "I'm not judging you." He smiled warmly. "I'm wondering why I didn't wait another 30 seconds myself." Mrs. Lawson stood and walked toward the piano. "You know," she said without turning around, "life has a funny way of bringing the right people together." She played a gentle melody that filled the apartment. "Sometimes it happens quickly." Her fingers drifted gracefully across the keys. "And sometimes." She looked back at us with a smile. "It simply needs a little patience." As the final note faded, none of us spoke. Some moments are too beautiful for words. A month later, our apartment building held its annual summer garden gathering. Neighbors filled the courtyard with homemade food, music, and laughter. Children chased bubbles across the grass. Someone played acoustic guitar beneath the old oak tree. Mrs. Lawson insisted Kurt play the piano that had been wheeled outside for the occasion. "I'll embarrass myself." "You'll survive," she replied. He looked at me. "Will you stay?" "I wouldn't miss it." As he began to play, the courtyard gradually grew quiet. The melody was gentle, warm, hopeful. It sounded exactly like him. When he finished, applause echoed through the garden. He walked straight toward me. "I've been thinking," he said. "That usually means something important." "It does." He took a slow breath. 2 years ago, I thought the best part of my morning was seeing you for 30 seconds. He smiled softly. "Now I can't imagine a day without you." My heart swelled. He reached for both of my hands. "I don't know what the future looks like." "I don't either. But I'd really like to discover it with you." Tears gathered in my eyes before I even realized it. So would I. He wrapped me in the gentlest embrace. Around us, our neighbors quietly smiled. Someone started clapping. Then everyone else joined in. I buried my face against his shoulder, laughing through happy tears. We're never going to hear the end of this, are we? Definitely not. The building manager walked past, grinning. I've been waiting 2 years for that hug. The entire courtyard erupted with laughter. Even I couldn't stop laughing. Months later, life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Morning coffee together. Shared grocery trips. Sunday dinners with our families. Thursday visits to Mrs. Lawson, who never let us leave without homemade cookies, and another story about how stubborn we had both been. One evening, nearly a year after the elevator stopped between the 4th and 5th floors, Kurt and I stepped into it once again. The doors closed. The elevator began to descend. He looked at me with a playful smile. You know what? I almost miss getting stuck. I laughed. I was just thinking the same thing. He slipped his hand into mine. This elevator changed my life. I squeezed his hand gently. It changed mine too. As the doors opened into the lobby, we didn't rush out. Instead, we stood there for one extra heartbeat, looking at the place where everything had finally begun. If someone had told me that the love of my life lived one floor above me, I would have laughed. Not because it sounded impossible, but because I never imagined that the greatest love story of my life wouldn't begin with fireworks. It would begin with shared smiles, a broken elevator, and 45 unforgettable minutes that taught 2 quiet hearts how to finally say hello. And every time those elevator doors opened after that, they never opened on strangers again. I hope you enjoyed listening to Clara and Kurt's story. Sometimes the biggest changes in our lives don't begin with extraordinary events, they begin with a simple conversation we've been afraid to start. Brought to you by Drama Spark. Written by Pearl Chua.